Well, we are live, folks. Ready to go, aren't we?
We are indeed.
I'm super psyched for this one. How about you, JJ?
Oh, yeah. Can't wait. And we've got all the technology running concurrently everywhere. I've got the clubhouse room open. So to James and Timur, hello, welcome. Hand raising's off for the moment while we do our first 30 minutes. And then we're going to bring you all up if you want to have a chat. So don't despair if you hear my voice and James's voice coming out of the one little picture. It's meant to be that way. So what else is happening, James? Where else are we streaming?
So we are on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube. Thank you for everyone tuning in there. We had a little issue with Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube. Yeah, we had a little issue with LinkedIn. We've restarted the feed, so we should be okay now. People should be joining us on LinkedIn here in just a few moments.
Excellent. I've got to check it as well. You know, the things we need a producer. Come on.
Yeah, we do need a producer. If anyone wants to volunteer to produce the show, we will gladly take you on.
It's like, well, they said, don't ever work with animals, children, or James and JJ. Isn't that the list? I'm pretty sure that's the list. That's what it should be anyway.
You know, last week we had a bunch of J's in our clubhouse room, right? It was like all J's for a moment.
Well, at the moment, as I cast my eyes, there's four of us, including you, Mr. Azar, if you were in there. So
I am not at the moment. I am not, simply because of my internet connection at my current location. I have to be very, very mindful of.
That's okay. That's okay. Look, please make sure you subscribe, you follow, you do all the things you need to do not to miss out. I think this is going to be a very interesting conversation. And yes, all opinions on the show are our own and don't reflect any organization. Da, da, da. What are we talking about today, James?
So we're talking about the thing going on in the Land Down Under. And that thing going on in the Land Down Under right now is mandatory incident cybersecurity reporting. Kind of, there's a flirtation with the idea of making it a requirement to report a incident or a near miss of an incident, which is causing a bit of a turmoil. You've been all over the news with it, JJ. So tell me a little bit, because this has been brought to my attention thanks to you. So tell me a little bit about what's the conversation in Australia and where's this stemming from?
All righty. Well, I'll read some of the articles directly so I don't misquote anybody. There is nothing worse than misquoting yourself, if that's even possible. Hold on, let me open this one up. Dun, dun, dun. Really bad radio stuff, bad podcast things. And here we go. All right, mandatory cyber reporting, good first step. This is by my friend, Mr. David Swan at The Australian. Home Affairs boss Mike Pizzullo told Senate estimates yesterday that mandatory reporting is being considered as an extension of the cybersecurity strategy, a move being described by cyber experts as a move in the right direction. I have flagged with the minister that this will be one of the issues. I haven't yet given her advice on that question, and it's something I wish to consult with the Director General, yada, 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 yada. We need, and then I have a little bit to say about it, saying we need more visibility and transparency, leading to more conversations. And some other people in the industry, John Lang from DDLS, points that we do need some more mandatory reporting and potentially some training as well from a board and government perspective, which, I'm not sure about. But it is one of those things that, now I know what's going to happen here. I have very strong feelings about it on one perspective, and I know James is going to think very differently. So I'm going to go with you first this time, Mr. Azar. What's your immediate reaction to this mandatory reporting options?
So, look, conceptually speaking, mandatory reporting sounds amazing, right? Like, how could it go wrong?
Yeah. Okay.
Wonderful. It's mandatory reporting. You know.
So what's the rose-colored glasses view from your world?
So here's the thing about mandatory reporting, which is, what are you reporting and who are you reporting it to? Number one, right? And why are you reporting? What defines a incident? If someone went into your infrastructure and looked around and left and didn't leak any data, are you required to report it? if data was breached, but it was below the threshold for reporting, are you required to report it? Right? If it was, there's so many different things around mandatory reporting to me. And I get the idea of information sharing and transparency, and there's no one greater at wanting to promote information sharing and transparency than yours truly. At the same time, I have a hard time seeing this being effective for a business.
Okay.
And I think it has. See, the thing about cybersecurity incidents, and this is kind of like the people on the vendor side will not want to hear me say this. The people on the practitioner side may or may not agree with me, is the following. Mandatory reporting is only good to boost my stock and my sales and have good talking points to people in order to get them to buy what I'm selling. For a practitioner, mandatory reporting creates another obstacle on the path to actually creating security by design. And cybersecurity requires deterrence. It doesn't require more reporting and transparency. It requires, let me correct that. Cybersecurity requires deterrence. It also requires transparency, but that transparency has to be something where there's mutual trust on both sides of the ball. And I don't know how much I trust government just randomly coming in and saying you mandatorily have to report this stuff without giving me some sort of exception. Meaning, could there be a possibility that I could be prosecuted, or could the information that I share be used against me in a lawsuit or in criminal proceedings or in civilian proceedings? And if so, then am I setting myself up for an increased amount of liability, which increases the amount of doing business, which increases the cost to the consumer? And I mean, people think that this stuff just doesn't come up there, but yes, it does. If I've got to fill out 5 more forms that require 3 more lawyers that are going to charge me $1,000 an hour to do these forms, and they're going to take 3 weeks to do these forms, meaning I'm paying them probably close to 120 grand each, right? Someone's paying for that, and it's not going to be the shareholders.
No, you're right. Absolutely. Okay, so everything you've said has validity and is correct. And as look, I was going to say rose-colored glasses. They're just different. It's not rose-colored glasses. My approach to all of this just is different. And the way I see it is everything needs to be prefaced with intent. And why would we be doing this to start with? What behavioural change would we need to expect? How would we motivate? What kind of ways can we reinforce positively the change of let's just say someone dropped 10 USBs at an organization's car park and they were all, had malicious software on them, but they were actually reported. So they were actually brought into IT, and IT in that organization were able to look at it and maybe be able to report on it. If not, just something in general, not something that required forms and no litigation, that kind of thing. This is about information sharing to a point of, if you do share, we'll acknowledge you, whether that be a tax break, whether that be a group of people willing to help you with these things, so that any organization doesn't have to have their own cyber team. So I'm looking at from that holistic point of view to say, you just can't say, we're going to do mandatory reporting. This is what we would like to do. Here's why we want to do it. Here's how it could work. Here's where we know we don't want it to look, which is what you've just said, James, and I totally agree. It won't work if we did it that way, that it was going to be really complex. But if we could, at a higher level, to 80% on to say, this month there was a spike in USB drops in, let's say, in Sydney. Just look at Australia for the moment. They didn't see them in Melbourne or Adelaide, so just keep your eyes out. It's sort of like a Crime Stoppers, if you will, for cyber. So it doesn't need to be on the high end of ridiculous, because I agree with you. No one's going to do that. But if it's an anonymous thing even, somehow to be able to say, look, this is what just happened. It was a near miss, or this is what we know happened, like accidents and deaths on the road. We talk about deaths on the road. We don't talk about people that have had an accident and an injury will affect the rest of their lives. We only talk about deaths on the road. There's a whole lot of other things we don't talk about. And it's about having the full transparency, because I do not believe we actually have a clear understanding of how big this issue is of cyber outside the world of cyber. Everyone else over here only hears what the headlines tell them. They don't hear the reality.
So when you look at mandatory reporting as a general rule of thumb, right? It's one, who am I reporting to that I care about the most? And what are they doing with that information? Meaning, could my competitor now know that I'm going through a cyber incident and use that to win more business than me, or approach my existing customers and use that as a lever? Like, you don't want to do business with James. James just reported a breach. Do business with me. I'm JJ. I'm much more secure.
Definitely want that level of anonymity for that very reason.
But how effective is anonymity? Because some cyber threats are different than others based on vertical and organizations, right? Yep. So there's that aspect of it as well. To me, the idea of mandatory reporting has to come back to, what are we trying to accomplish from mandatory reporting? So if it's the idea of creating some sort of like crime watch, crime stoppers type of thing, then I'd look at this and go, okay, interesting, but who's paying attention and who's registered for it? And who's processing that information? Because here's the deal. You know, if you talk to any cybersecurity analyst, tier 1, tier 2, there's something called an alert fatigue.
Yes.
So when does that become an alert fatigue? Like, I sign up for US certs and Israel certs and EU cert warnings by email. If you ask me today, James, how many emails do you get a week? Probably close to 200. How many of them do you actually read? Very few.
That many.
A handful.
Yeah.
Because it's email alert fatigue. So if mandatory reporting is going into the concept of, we're now going to start sending everyone who signs up emails about everything that's going on, you're like, wonderful. But how effective is that really going to be? Right? Because it's probably going to create some level of fatigue, some level of, disingenuine understanding of something, and people are just going to go, I don't really care anymore. Like, whatever. Because they're not going to care.
What about when we think about the alternative? And remember, I've come into the world of cyber very differently than you have. So when Aggie, I saw that. Good morning, Mr. McQuiggan. We're in stereo. He's watching us live on LinkedIn, listening to us on Clubhouse. You could be watching us on YouTube as well and listening to us on Facebook, James. Pretty poor.
He could be, but James is special, and I like him that way.
He is special. We love you, James. If you think about the alternative. So at the moment, we do not have a clear picture. The language is very interesting. I was looking at ransomware reports today because everything I see, there'll be a phishing or a malicious email element. Then there'll be a human not paying attention. Then there'll be, poor cyber hygiene. Then there'll be a lack of training. There'll be, let's say, 12 elements in a graph of all the different reasons of how ransomware happens, but 8 of them are all to do with humans. And so why are they not grouped together to say human error? And this is where, there's another layer there that we're not talking about. And I think if there was more understanding out in the general public, this is not about the world of cyber. This is the other side of cyber. This is the human element of cyber. These are the people who just still don't get it. The biggest concern from IT professionals is they know that their people do not understand the consequence should a breach happen. No matter what that breach is, they just don't get it. However, in the same token, those same people think that they have a high level of awareness of cybersecurity in their organization. I've asked many surveys and the results are consistent. There is a gap of what IT professionals think their people know and what their people actually know. And if we don't have some visibility of the facts of what is going on out there to say, wow, there was, and I don't care if it's a ridiculous number. In one organisation I worked at, I challenged them to actually say, well, if you know how many emails are coming into the organisation and you know how many don't make it through that first firewall, we should communicate that to everybody. No, we don't want them to know. What's the difference? As soon as we did, they realised how prevalent and how real these attacks are. There was nearly 100,000 emails coming in a day. 80,000 were spam or known phishing, known issues, and they wouldn't even get through. That's a hell of a lot of emails coming in that never even make it. But everyone in IT knew that, but no one in the organisation knew that. It brought a massive, oh, wow, okay, I didn't realise we were a target. Yeah, we are a target. So now let's really talk about it. So if we don't know what's going on, how do we do it?
That example is a lack of maturity within an organization, right? It's not necessarily a lack of reporting. It's just bad leadership. I'm sorry, but it is. It's just bad leadership. If your leaders can't communicate how real threats are to your organization, and the only people who know it are people in IT and security, and no one else knows it, then that's just bad leadership. That's an underqualified person leading that team.
I'll challenge you on that, because in Australia, in general, there just isn't. And please, anyone in Australia, tell me I'm wrong. We would not be having the situations we're having now, even globally. And I'll challenge you on it as well, James. I don't believe that there is that level of transparency in most organisations. I would love to find out for sure.
I'll push back. So here's the thing. Good cybersecurity leaders know how to communicate the cybersecurity risk to an organization. The easiest KPI to go to the board with is how many phishing emails we get a day, a week, an hour. That's the easiest KPI for me to get more money. It's the easiest KPI. And anyone who says otherwise to me is just blind to the fact. Really, it's the easiest. It's the easiest KPI.
Easiest KPI to get buy-in?
Yes, and I'll tell you why. It's a measurable number. There's an industry standard, and there's a success rate. So if I'm getting hit 1 million times, and my hit rate is 90%, meaning 10% are getting through, meaning 100,000 emails are getting through. Of those 100,000 emails, I've got a team of, let's say, 100 people, just for the sake of math, right? 20% consistently click the links when I do my phishing tests, right? So now I've got 20,000 emails that could potentially be open. Out of those 20,000 emails, let's say 18,000 are known, trackable, stoppable malware strains that I know exist, that everyone knows, that my EDR solution and everything knows how to quarantine. And then there's that 2,000, and that number is that 2,000, right?
Yes.
That's the 2,000. And how do I defend my organization from the 2,000? Now that's defense in depth. Now, the most basic of people, and Hans here has a very interesting comment, we'll bring it up, but Hans says, are you saying that the lack of a cyber culture? I agree, but IT cyber has not done a good job at communicating the risk in plain terms. And yeah, Hans, I'm trying to break that down right now, right? This is so simple to me, and maybe I am just right. But to me, this is like, when people said, how do you measure cyber? Well, this is an easy way for me to translate cyber. Well, these 2,000 emails that could make it through, that aren't trackable, that if they're executed could put us in a ransomware attack. Average recovery for a ransomware attack is 287 days, right? So let's take 287 days, multiply that by how many dollars we would lose by not being 100% operational. So let's say we're 0% operational for 5 days, right? And then we go to 10% operational for 2 weeks. And then we're 50% operational. And if you calculate all the your revenue per day, and let's say it's $1 million, you lose $5 million your first day, you're going to lose another $5 million. So if we invest $2 million now to mitigate $20 million worth of risk, is that worth it to the board? The answer is always going to be yes. The answer is always going to be yes from the board. The CFO is going to write you a $2 million check right then and there. Go do your thing. The idea of mandatory reporting when it comes to ransomware. See, the thing about ransomware is I can put a security system in my house. I can put security guards. I can put all the different controls, but if someone wants to break in, they're going to find that weak point when the security guard goes to the bathroom and when the tapes reset, and they're going to come right in. Or they're going to wear a Bill Clinton mask and come right in, right? Like they're just going to do that. You know, ransomware is crime, and crime's always going to happen irregardless. How do you stop crime? The question isn't about reporting here, and this is where the focus always goes by incompetent government. Okay, and I say that globally when it comes to this stuff. Yep. The only government that looks at cyber differently are communist regimes who have complete control over their internet and infrastructure, and they kill the news. But in a free democratic society, we have incompetent government at times trying to create different rules that do nothing to stop the business, that do nothing to help the business. Mandatory reporting doesn't help me. It's more work for me.
Well, it depends how it's done. So
it's additional cost, irregardless to how it's done, because you know why? If it's mandatory reporting, every organization is going to have multiple lawyers ready to handle it, irregardless to whether or not James can do it himself, because they're going to look at it and be like, well, don't use those words. Let's use this one. Don't phrase it this way. We should do this way, right? Because they're paying attention to that.
Everything needs to be framed with intent. And I wish, James, that there were people, like you said, that you could say these 2,000 emails are coming in, these are phishing emails, these are legitimate, and we need to do something about it, and the board would say, yep, here's the money. It does not happen. The reason it does not happen in the majority of cases, and I'm only going to speak for Australia here because I've read enough of the numbers to know the education, and to Hans's point, the culture is just not there. And people wait too long. It won't happen to us. Far too much is going on in even the APAC region. Again, I'm not going to speak for America, but the headlines still go to prove we do not have enough understanding from a whole business point of view, not just IT, but a holistic approach to say this is actually huge. This is a global situation that we all need to take responsibility for and do something. Listen to our CISOs, listen to our cyber experts, and actually do something. And the issue is you need to rephrase.
I think you are too intertwined within APAC. To me, I look from the other side of the world. And to me, speaking to some of the CISOs in Australia and Singapore, I see a far greater attention by the boards to cyber threats, because the largest, most prolific actor of cyber threats is China. And most of the countries in APAC are concerned about China from an espionage perspective, from a cyber perspective, and from a military encroachment perspective. The derailment there for organizations is the lack of deterrence from government. Yep. See, to me, instead of doing mandatory reporting, create deterrence to threat actors and to nations that promote these threat actors.
Yep.
Right?
We'll do both. There isn't a one or the other, James. We need to do more on all levels. And
but you got to start with deterrence. You don't stop crime, right? You don't stop crime by saying everyone's got to report a break-in. Of course, everyone's going to report a break-in because something got stolen, and unless something that got stolen from you stole to begin with, right? That's not going to be the case, right? So we don't need mandatory reporting to report crimes, because most organizations report it. They're reported anonymously in the U.S. to IC3, which is the FBI Internet Crime Reporting Portal, right? The cyber crime something, data, ic3.gov. Anyone can go check it out. It's the FBI's portal for, you can report cybercrime anonymously. Most police departments and bureaus that investigate cybercrime, when they're called on it, will go to IC3 and register the case and say, I'm investigating ACH fraud that happened to this small business here that took away $25,000 from them, right? But those cases don't get investigated by the FBI because they're looking at the $1 million, right? The dark side ransomware gang that held up the Colonial Pipeline, right? Or the Russians or the North Koreans that are making away with hundreds of millions of dollars worth of crypto from crypto exchanges all over the world, right? So those kinds of things come to fact right there. I think the idea of create a deterrence, and that deterrence has got to be, how do you hold these people accountable, and how do you make it so that crime doesn't pay for them anymore, right? Some people have talked about making it illegal to pay ransomware.
Yeah.
Well, okay, let's say theoretically we did that. Now, who's going to compensate you if your business is held at ransom and you've got nothing?
Exactly. But yes, yep, that's right.
Is it going to be taxpayer dollars for your negligence? Because then that becomes really easy. I've got a failing business. I'll make myself really accessible to ransomware. Ransomware comes in, shuts down my business. I can't pay it. I go to the government, I file a claim. Government says, all right, you lost $10 million, sir. Here's $10 million of the hard-earned taxpayer money so that you can continue to be in business. That's BS.
Just come back a little bit to the data-driven defense. So what you're trying to do is, and I agree with deterrence, but we're trying to manage something we don't even have the data there to manage. We can't even measure it to say, we're saying it's sort of maybe this big kind of. We have no evidence.
You know who has the data? Insurance companies.
Well, maybe not.
No, they do. They absolutely do. 100% they do. There's no maybe or maybe not.
If they do, the cyber insurance world is imploding on itself at the moment.
Correct.
And that's another really good topic to talk about for this very reason.
Yeah.
There is if we're going from the approach of the data-driven defense point of view, which is the way to go, then what I'm talking about here is actually getting that data. We cannot defend against something that we do not have visibility on. We say there's $1 trillion lost every year and 4 million events that happen. No one actually knows.
Well, no, they know. So when the FBI reports these numbers, they report them based on what's reported in IC3. I disagree with you there.
I don't believe everything's reported.
No, but they say this is probably 10 to 15% of what we know really took place, because the rest of it, people don't want to report it because companies don't want to take that. I want to get to some comments because we're almost out of time. We're about to switch to Clubhouse. If you're not on Clubhouse and you want an invite, ping me or JJ with your phone number. We'll send you an invite now to get there. So Hans says mandatory reporting is usually misinterpreted by everyone. It becomes a jurisdiction fight and the cost becomes more heavy than the solution. Usually this is reactive. Also, in a few cases, the government can lead by example.
Great.
Hans also says, are there enough cyber cops to respond to all the reporting? This also creates the exception that the government will take some level of action. Yeah. So I want to address two of those things. One, government rarely leads by example. Rarely. I have great friends that work in FBI and Secret Service and CISA, and they're really good people, well-intentioned. But big government never gets anything done correctly. Never does. I'm telling you, as someone who's right now in Israel, I need to get something done on my U.S. passport that I couldn't do in the U.S. because of COVID restrictions and I couldn't get an appointment. And I'm going through hell to get it done here at the U.S. Embassy. All right? To me, government employees are the epitome of dysfunctionality. And if they were a business, they would all be fired. So the government coming and telling me that it's mandatory reporting and you got to report to our career people who can't get fired. And if anyone has any quarrels with that, go look at Project Veritas, where they did some undercover work with government employees who say, yeah, man, I do whatever I want. And I can go against the president of the United States or any policy, and no one can fire you once you're a government employee. It's impossible. And so let that just sink in for a minute. So mandatory reporting to me could become something that, in the wrong hands, And, because it's not the elected leaders that run it, it's typically the people who work there, who's very hard to get fired. And that's the same in Australia as it is in America and Canada and anywhere else, right? You end up with a bunch of bureaucrats, unelected bureaucrats with a job that they don't really care. And guess what? Some data gets in, some data doesn't. You don't fill out the form correctly. You're not as clear. And it becomes a crapshoot. That's why I think government should stay the hell out of it.
So
When it comes to cyber cops, I like the idea of cyber cops, of equipping local police departments with a cyber unit that's able to handle smaller claims, and it's able to put all that data together on a national perspective. Because communities are stronger than a national level. And I know some people are going to disagree with this, and that's okay. We can agree to disagree that I'm always wrong. We can agree to disagree, but we also agree that I'm right. Right? The fact is...
Think about that for a minute.
The fact is that a local community policing, for example, you're in Adelaide, right? Yep. If the Adelaide Police Department had a cybercrime team, and that cybercrime team was working with all the local Adelaide businesses. Now, the Adelaide cyber unit can also work with the national team, right? That deals with national security matters within the Ministry of Interior or Ministry of Defense within the Australian government. Yep. But that local team has the pulse of the local Adelaide businesses. They understand the landscape. They understand the risks. They see the positives and the negatives. Because you know why? Because they're in those businesses. The FBI does this very well. So the FBI in the U.S., like we have the Atlanta field office with the cyber unit, we've got great agents there. We all know those agents, right? We're very familiar with them. They're great people, and we enjoy talking to them, right? And they know what's going on. If something's happening, they're always quick to call the people they know within those organizations to say, hey, we're seeing an increase in this kind of stuff. Here are some of the TTPs and IOCs. You should pay attention to it. If I'm going through a situation, I can hypothetically pick up the phone and talk to them in hypotheticals, get a bunch of data hypothetically because they want to help us. So there's that aspect. I think mandatory reporting is overreach. And I think we need to go to Clubhouse because we're out of time.
All right, I'm going to play the music. We're going to see you guys over in Clubhouse shortly. Give us like 15 seconds maybe. And Hans, come on over to Clubhouse. If you aren't there yet, send either James or myself a direct message and we can send you an invite. Both Android and iOS are there. Thank you all so much for listening. This has been an awesome conversation. I look forward to continuing the battle over in Clubhouse. This is the other side with James Azar and JJ. Smash, subscribe, like, do all the things, tell your friends, all that stuff. Did I miss anything, James?
No, you missed not a thing.
Should I play music?
Cue the music, and I'm going to take us away.
All right.